Someone posted a comment on one of my videos very recently and just really stirred up in me an idea that I wanted to share. And one of the things that I've always done in life is had like a lot of questions, and I've often had a lot of tough questions. I've had a lot of questions that really don't have answers here on earth, at least not the sort of questions where you can find the answer. You might be able to find a answer or a series of answers, but be unable to decipher which one is correct. And drove my poor father crazy, I think. He's alive, by the way. He's fine. But as an adolescent, I asked a lot of philosophical questions that I think he wasn't up for. But my point is, someone basically wrote and said, that they were jealous of my ability to retire and wish they could do something like that. And I think that we have this tendency to, forget how many options and choices we really have. And so I want to walk you through something that I wrestled with many years ago, and in some way was a type of wrestling, I think, that led to what I've done now, which is to sort of take an early temporary retirement for the next 20 years, knowing that eventually I'll very likely run out of money and have to go back to work. But instead of being retired from 60 to 80, I'll be retired from 35 to 55 and have won that time with my children. So anyway, so here goes. I was raised in a single income family. My father worked, my mom did not. And she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And she was, let's say very loosely under the impression of if you're gonna buy a nice car, you should drive it, not put it in the garage. And so if you're gonna have kids, you should raise them, not farm them out to somebody else. And my parents originally, when I was young, were very poor. And as I got older, my dad made more and more money, but I don't want to give the impression that we grew up poor, because there's poverty in the world that makes the way I look growing up just extremely wealthy and luxurious. But I will say that what I want to say is that it wasn't because of my dad's high-paying job that my mom decided to stay home. She was going to stay home with us kids no matter what, hell or high water. And they have some stories to illustrate just how difficult it was for her to stay home, but that was their priority. And one thing my parents did a really good job of teaching my sister and I is that you have choices. You actually have a lot of choices. Now, you've automatically ruled a lot of them out, but you have them. So one of the things that she taught us and showed us is that lots of people believe that they need two incomes to support a family, and that's not true. And that's not to say that I think every family where the wife and the husband work, it's wrong and it's unthinkable and it shouldn't be. I think there are circumstances, but what I've come to believe by observation is that most people where the husband and wife works and they have kids think that the husband and wife need to keep working in order to live. I actually had a friend of mine, cumulative income was something like $200,000. And he made the comment, if my wife wasn't working, we couldn't survive. And he had a new $200,000 house, and he owned a boat, and both him and his wife had cars and phones. And I thought that was absolutely absurd and actually insulting to people who are struggling to survive. And so my wife is a stay-at-home mom and always has been. And one of the conversations that has been going on in my marriage for 15 years is, if families would be willing to give up the Florida vacations or the second house or the boat or the new cars or the new phone or the nice wardrobe, then they could easily have a stay-at-home parent. And so we've kind of funneled down the statement for the most part. It's a generalization. It doesn't apply in every case. So don't point out exceptions. But in general, people are unwilling to give up a particular lifestyle that they've become accustomed to in order to have a single income and spend more time raising their children. And one day, in a very sorrowful, solemn moment or series of moments, I realized that I was guilty of the same thing. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I realized that while I was spending 50 hours a week getting to work, being at work, eating lunch at work, getting home from work, my wife was spending that time with the children. And I began to do the arithmetic about, basically she was spending 50 more hours with the children every single week than I was. And I don't remember exactly how I did all the math, but I roughly calculated how many hours you spend going to school in kindergarten first all the way through 12th, and then getting an associate's and a bachelor's and a master's and a PhD. I roughly did that math. I don't remember how many hours it was, but what I figured out was my wife was going to spend so much time with the children, more than me, that it was going to be the equivalent of like kindergarten all the way through a PhD. And I just thought about like the depth of a relationship that she was going to have with my children that I wasn't going to have. And I didn't really feel guilty about it, but it was very vexing. I mean, I really had to like wrestle with that because, we began to have these conversations of like, Michelle, if I was willing to sell the house and move into a trailer park, move into a trailer, and we only have one car, and we only have one phone, and we buy all of our clothes at the thrift store, and we never go on vacation, we could both be home, and I could get a part-time job somewhere, 15 hours a week, 20 hours a week, whatever. And so I could win back for myself time with my children if I was willing to downgrade my lifestyle. And there are tons of people living in trailer parks. There are tons of people whose lifestyle is so bad they would love to live into they would love to move into a trailer park. And I happen to be in a demographic where husband and wife working and bringing in two incomes and having new or newer cars regularly, having a house, having a boat, having hobby money, having new cell phones, having going out to eat money, that was all considered normal. And so for these families in my peer group to one of the husband or the wife to quit their job and go down to a single income would pull them beneath the level that they thought was normal. And I was guilty of the same. To go, like, I really don't have, I have one friend who's been in a trailer park. I don't really have a lot of friends who are in trailers. And it's not because I look down on them. It's just because you enter into this world in a particular demographic, socioeconomic class, and you tend to hang out there. And so the class I grew up in, we didn't know that many people in a trailer park. But the point is, to downgrade my lifestyle to one old beat up car and used clothes from the thrift store and one cell phone and trailer park life, like that felt like a major below normal for me. And yet it's not really below normal. I mean, what is normal? And even this idea of working 40 hours a week, where did that come from? I believe in the beginning God created Adam and Eve, and there was 6 days of work, not 5, and 1 day of rest. And so it's like, where did this 40 hours a week come from? Like, where did we decide that 40 hours was full time and that's what men should do and no more, no less? And so I just really started to call into question some of my assumptions. The assumption that a man should work 40 hours a week, the assumption that one should buy a house and not a trailer in a trailer park, the assumption that you should both have cell phones and new clothes that no one else has worn and newer cars. And we began to sort of dismantle those assumptions, I guess. And we also had to ask some really super hard questions. And that was like, are we really choosing a nice house and 2 cars and 2 cell phones and a new wardrobe and vacation money and hobby money instead of our children? And the answer to some certain extent was yes, we were. And those are tough questions to ask and even tougher questions to answer. And so what I want to share with the world is a reminder that you probably have a lot more options than you recognize. If you're willing to give up the house and go to a trailer, if you're willing to give up the lease car and go to a used car or a bicycle or the bus, if you're willing to start shopping at a thrift store, if you're willing to give up having the newest phone, if you're willing to give up the television and Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu and Disney Plus, if you're willing, what was the other thing I was going to say? If you're willing to sleep on the carpet instead of a bed, if you're willing to have party chairs in your house instead of upholstered furniture, if you're willing to give up your hobbies, if you're willing to give up your vacation money, like there are so many things that people just assume. Like we don't have a television in the house. We don't have a television in the living room. We don't have a television. And people sometimes act like we're crazy, like insane. And it's like, wait a second, who's insane? Like 100 years ago, no one on earth had these things. No one. And 99% of the people who have ever had hearts and brains have not had a television. And yet we're choosing to live life without one, and we're crazy? Like, where did these assumptions come from that everyone has to have a television and you have to have Disney Plus and Hulu? And like, it's crazy. And if you and me, like, if we would just travel a little bit, maybe to Asia, maybe to Africa, maybe to South America, we would find out that these are not universally known assumptions. They're known in Europe and in Canada and United States and Mexico, but like, there are places where these assumptions are not the case. And anyway, I'm not trying to rant and I'm not trying to preach, but my heart just went out to this person who wrote this comment, to be honest. And I just want this person and anyone else who happens to stumble upon this video to know you have choices. You probably have choices. I mean, I know there are some people who are really, truly pigeonholed, but you probably have a long list of comforts and conveniences and luxuries that you could give up in order to gain something else. And I would just encourage you to examine those choices and put aside the assumptions of culture, of friends, of coworkers, of colleagues, of family, and ask yourself if you're really willing to sacrifice a bunch of things to get the thing that you really want. If that's time with your family, with your kids, if that's being around as a dad, man, I would just say, go for it. It is so worth it. It is so worth it. It is not an investment that you will regret. I have no authority to say this, but I promise you that. I don't know. I hope this will encourage someone, remind someone, inform someone. But if not, it was good for me to voice that even for myself and to sort of remember that truth that I once wrestled with and remember that truth that I once knew. So you can't have everything. I think in some ways you can have anything if you're willing to sacrifice the rest. So that's that. Take care. Take care, folks.